A warning, this podcast contains content some listeners may find confronting or distressing. Listener discretion is advised.
9 podcasts.
Ambulance, what's the town or suburb of the emergency?
Alva Beach Stabbings.
Okay, tell me exactly what's happened.
I've just had an injured lady knock on my door asking for help. I believe she has a dislocated shoulder.
And you do, turns out you do know them. I'm putting a job on and sending them up there. Thank you, bye.
I need police right now. I'm just stabbed and broken in my house.
It's extraordinarily rare to have access to the vast fly-on-the-wall recordings you've now listened to.
They're coming.
It's coming, they're coming lights and sirens.
People here can they're outside.
000 calls, officer body cam.
Mate, can you get on the ground for me? Is there anyone else in the house? This is a knife on the bench here.
Someone help me!
Police interviews.
Couldn't hear no response inside and knocking, and then Thomas said, Candace, I can see you come out.
Through the house, yep, in a V formation. Yep.
Then I don't know how, but Dean actually got them back outside and he was freaking out. He's like, I think I've killed someone.
Even an internal investigation.
How long are they going to be? They said, well, they're telling half an hour. I said, I think they need to pull their finger out because how many calls do they need?
If nothing else, it's a wildly fascinating, albeit tragic insight. Fittingly, after 7 episodes, I'm going to end with one final twist. One that, after 7 years, only emerged while making this podcast. A revelation not just for me, but for the Davy and Christensen families and their lawyers who've been on this long saga with them.
And that's something we didn't know about, can I just say, that we only found that out when we got the letter back from the coroner.
Turns out, the coroner who oversaw the inquest referred Dean Webber to the Director of Public Prosecutions. In other words, she thought perhaps he should be prosecuted for his actions. Not only that, the coroner did this only a day after she handed down her findings. Findings which seemed to suggest he did nothing wrong. Rather confusing, right? So, while by now, after hearing everything, you might be thinking it's time for these families to move on and let it go. Even if they should, it's revelations like that, and the way it's all been handled, that make it almost impossible.
If we were confident that the evidence was as accurate as it could be, when it went to the DPP for them to assess it and they came back and said there's no case to answer, then I think it would be easier for them to let this part of it go. Then they would be able to say, okay, we've done what we need for Tom, and let it go at that point. But I don't think until then they will.
I'm Adam Hegarty. Welcome to the final episode of Alva Beach, Death at the Door. It has shocked them and their lawyers that this year, when they got denied a second inquest, that they learned exactly that the coroner had referred it to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Have you ever heard that happen before and it not be public knowledge?
Well, in the coronial process in all states and territories, if the coroner forms a view that there is the potential for charges, then they stop the inquest and refer it to the DPP. In this case, the conclusion was drawn by the coroner in the absence of cross-examination that the wielder of the knife was acting in self-defence on the balance of probabilities, and then, at some later time, referred it to the DPP.
The day later, one day after her findings.
And it's unclear to me, after looking at the legislation, by what power she did that, without reference to the parties, and it's also unclear what information was forwarded to the DPP. If it was just the coronial findings, then it's unsurprising the DPP came to the conclusion that they did. But clearly, I've not heard of that process occurring before.
Both Julia Jasper, the Davy family's lawyer, and David Heilpin, a former coroner, are both describing an official ruling from the Queensland State Coroner, Terry Ryan. It was only seen by the Davies in early 2025. It denies their plea to throw out the findings of the first inquest and in turn their request for a second one. In it, the State Coroner responds directly to the issues raised by the late Chris Minery, the Davey family's barrister, which I went through last episode. There are 79 points. Most of it's a summary of what you've already heard about the night, or legal jargon. But it's a few paragraphs buried on page 15, right at the end, that took everyone completely by surprise. According to the document, as I've already alluded to, the Deputy Coroner who conducted the inquest, Jane Bentley, referred Dean Webber to the Director of Public Prosecutions, unbeknownst, it seems, to almost everyone else involved. Because, and I'm quoting it here, Her Honour had a suspicion, based upon reasonable grounds, that Mr Webber had committed an indictable offence. What the State Coroner goes on to say in this ruling, for some, sows more doubt, while for others, it vindicates Dean. He says this: following a review of the material and statements, he, being the Director of Public Prosecutions, had concluded that charges of murder against Mr Webber in relation to both deaths had no reasonable prospects of success. Pretty emphatic. So what does David Harlpen make of that?
Well, the conclusions that the coroner draws, and in turn the conclusions that apparently the DPP has drawn, are based on some evidence, but not all the evidence. And that leads to a situation, particularly for the grieving families, of disquiet. And why wouldn't it?
Agree or not, that just about sums it all up. Legal minds taking issue with what was and wasn't considered, while there are obviously countless others who'd be thinking, I'll say it again, let it go. Dean did nothing wrong. It goes without saying the Davies and the Christensens are, to put it lightly, biased. But remember, David Harlpen is a respected former coroner, and he considers it all mishandled.
I was very surprised that the police came to the conclusion that they did so quickly. I was then surprised he was not required to give evidence, and I was then surprised at the Supreme Court decision that answers to written questions from a key witness are sufficient. And I was then surprised that the state coroner made the decision that there should be no inquest. And the reason for my surprise is not because decision by decision by decision they're wrong, but because the overall outcome is so unsatisfactory that we now, 7 years later, have the opportunity to reopen and it's not done.
Why do you think they haven't reopened the inquest?
Well, the reasons given by the state coroner were that to reopen the inquest would really only go to criminal liability, not to anything else. I take a different view. The reopening of the inquest would enable evidence to be tested to more successfully come to a conclusion, with more certainty come to a conclusion about what actually happened. If at the end of the day Dean Webber does give evidence, is cross-examined, and the conclusion is drawn, even if the families disagree with it, but the conclusion is drawn on all the evidence properly tested, that he was acting entirely in self-defence and that he should not face prosecution, my experience is that people walk away from that saying, well, I didn't agree with it, but the process was sound. And that's an outcome that is still achievable in this case if there is a reopened inquest.
And wouldn't, as a coroner, you want that? Wouldn't you as a coroner say, okay, I need to test this evidence because I need to write in my findings and be categorically confident of what I'm ruling?
The safest way to come to a conclusion is to hear all the evidence. It's what the criminal justice system is built on. And what the coronial function is put to one side if only one side of the story is given.
Why should more people than the Davy and Christensens care about what's happened in this case?
The reason the rest of the community should care is because we never know when we are also, or members of our family are also, going to be put in a similar situation. And that's the protections for families in coronial inquests are protections for family A and family B today, but for the rest of the community tomorrow. And that level of uncertainty should concern us all.
David, it's clearly so raw for you still, and it's been a number of years now. But what could happen in this case for you as a dad, as a family, to get some closure or some answers? What do you want to see happen here?
I wish Dean Webber would come and see me and my wife. That's what I'd like to happen. Just as I don't want to do no damage to him. I wouldn't hurt the boy. I just want to know. That's all. I'd like him to come and talk to us. Just to give us a bit of closure on it, you know. Yeah, just to come and just talk to us.
What would you ask him, David?
I would just tell him about Corey and Tom. We're good men. Yeah. But I just like Dean Webber to come and just have a talk. I don't care for how long. Just.
So for you, David, is it not a case of you pointing the finger at Dean? Is it you just want to know what happened to move on?
I just want to know. That's right. I just want to know. I just want his side of the story. That's all. And I suppose all he can tell me, he was so scared. But why? Why would a kid? That's what I can't work out. I know. I thought that young Webber would have come round and seen me and Karen within a week. Nobody's even been to see us. Except the ones I know, the Webbers I know, they brought their grandfather down to talk to me.
What did they say?
Just said, it's just, how did it all happen, you know? How did this happen?
You can't listen to these families and not empathise. All the technicality and legal arguments aside, after 7 years, we have two families here who just can't bring themselves to move on. Because they feel the process, the investigation, all of it, hasn't allowed them to find that closure, those resolute answers. You might entirely disagree, and that's okay. It's why I'm sure this podcast, like the Alva Beach case, is polarising. But as I bring it to a close here, we'll go back to Tom and Corey's parents. Like it or not, they feel ignored.
Our whole family is traumatised. Our son had to leave his job that he loved as a paramedic. That was his life dream, to be a paramedic, to help people. He's now done a psychology degree so he can still help people. Our daughter works as a paediatric intensive care nurse so she can help. Like, that's our family. Tom was the same. Like, we're just so proud of our 3 children, and we will never recover from this.
We spoke early on about Corey and Tom only meeting that night.
Yeah.
Do you reflect on that and just think about, how it was just such a fateful meeting?
I think had nothing happened, later on, I think they would have been good friends. And I think because he loves fishing, crabbing, camping, and I understand from Corey's widow, Jay, that, they all like those things too. I think they would have been kept friends.
How are Corey's kids, your grandkids?
They're great. We're going down there on in October because it's his 18th birthday. The oldest boy. They're doing great. Yep, they're still in all sports.
You must teach them about their dad.
Oh, they know about their dad. I mention it to him all the time. I see him. And they know.
Families don't ever really recover from something like this. And even if, as I've said, you don't agree with their thoughts, they'll still be living with the pain and fighting long after you finish listening to this podcast. Everyone's trying to handle that in their own way. Corey's parents still live in Alva Beach. Imagine that, just up the road from where this all happened. In contrast, Corey's wife Jay has left Alva. And while I know she's still frustrated by all of it, she's trying her best to move forward with her and Corey's boys however she can. Then there's the Davies. They live in New South Wales, and their battle continues. They're taking civil court action over Tom's death, and they're also writing to every politician who might listen, including the Queensland Premier, in hopes it will all be revisited. And yep, it might all prove futile.
My experience is that where there is an injustice that is so clear, as in this case, that parliamentarians of all ilks do take it seriously. I would imagine this would not be a partisan matter.
That's really interesting that you use the word injustice. I don't think I've ever heard the process described like that. It's always considered, it's so complicated, it's not black and white. But you think this is a clear miscarriage of justice?
I think that when you just look at the big picture and you say, why haven't these people been able to test the evidence of the key witness, then that's an injustice.
The Alva Beach tragedy is also something Candice Locke, Louis Bengoa, and of course Dean Webber will always live with. It's important to acknowledge that. Dean still lives up in North Queensland, and while I haven't been able to speak to him or his family directly, it's become pretty clear he has a wealth of support from people adamant he is a victim here who's, demonstrably for them, done absolutely nothing wrong. Candice also still lives in the region, as does Louis. But I can confidently say neither of them, nor Dean for that matter, have gone out of their way to ever cross paths again, not with each other or the Davy and Christensen families. To borrow a tired cliche, there are absolutely no winners here. And as I finish this podcast, that's one of the main things that sticks with me. This thought that had only the police and ambulance response been quicker and better, then all their lives would be so different. How awful that genuinely wonderful people and families are dealt this card in life.
I think if there had been more certainty in the inquest, if things had gone differently, if we'd found more things out, if we were confident that the evidence was as accurate as it could be, when it went to the DPP for them to assess it and they came back and said there's no case to answer, and we were happy that everything had been done in the way that it is, then I think it would be easier for them to let this part of it go. I don't think that would make them let go of the system's failure, so the failure of the police and the ambulance to prevent the deaths that night, and whether there is some liability there or some changes that can be made from preventing it. I think that's a separate issue, but maybe if we're at that point, then they would be able to say, okay, we've done what we need for Tom and let it go at that point. But I don't think until then they will. But I know that the outcome is that they're seeking is not his conviction. That's not what anybody's aim is. It's really not. And it's not even for him to be charged, because again, that's not a decision for anybody other than the proper people, the Director of Public Prosecutions. It's for that assessment to be made on what we believe is as accurate as it can be, representation of the events that occurred that night.
People listening to this or watching this might sit there and think, Davies, Christensen's, maybe it's time just to move on. Maybe it is just, self-defence, a coroner's ruled that, the investigating detective decided that. People will listen to this and probably still form that opinion.
Oh, sure.
What would you say to anyone who decides, no, there's nothing to see here, it's self-defence?
Keep an open mind. These are not infallible people. If police were infallible, we wouldn't need a court system. If courts were infallible, we wouldn't need an appeal system. Keep an open mind.
So, where does this all leave us? Well, in the absence of a second inquest, I think you've just heard and hopefully picked apart almost everything a court would need to consider. That's one point to end on. But I also think we can't ever allow anything like this to happen again. And I don't mean the violence. I mean everything that followed.
A domino effect of failures right from the start.
The botched police, ambulance and 000 response goes without saying. Much needs to be learned from that bungle. But also the legal process.
So although we can go, well, this decision was right or that decision was wrong, the big picture is just so unsatisfactory for those families.
We will go back to the courts and we will make the arguments, the complicated technical legal arguments that will need to be made to get it reopened, and hopefully we'll be successful.
I don't think we should ever have a situation in this country where a coronial inquest is so controversial that lawyers storm out, a former coroner considers it an injustice, and grieving families are left feeling ignored and desperate. 7 years on. That's not what the law is there for. And as polarising as it is, surely we can all agree that shouldn't happen.
We grow up in Australia thinking that the justice system will work for you if something tragic happens.
We need this to come to a proper outcome. All we ask is that it goes through the motions of what it's supposed to go through. The way the system was made, you can't do what they're doing.
For me personally, justice is what we've grown up in, which is if someone thinks you've done a crime, you get charged, probably out on bail, go to a court where there are a jury and a judge, and they make the decision. And whatever that decision is, we will then be able to live with that because it's gone through a system that we believe in. But none of that has happened.
You've been through a long legal process, an inquest, You've got a lawyer, hiring barristers is a huge financial strain. How do you keep stomaching that and wearing that?
Tom, that's how. He's our boy, and we don't have him anymore.
We're fighting for Tom.
The loss is immeasurable to anything you can ever imagine. It's the wrong way it is. Children bury their parents at the end of their lives, not parents burying their children. That's wrong. And in this instance, it's so unnecessary. It could have all been avoided.
Thank you for listening. A great deal of work's gone into it. It's taken courage from many to put themselves back out there in the face of some strong reaction and even ridicule. And while it will divide many, I feel it's important. Alva Beach Death at the Door is a 9 podcasts and 60 minutes production, written and presented by me, Adam Hegarty. The producer is Jess Lodge, editing and sound design by Maddie White. I want to thank everyone who spoke to me for this podcast, especially the Davy and Christensen families. Thanks too to our lawyer, Courtney Scallon, and our 60 Minutes crew, Kate Thompson, Matt Brown, and Serge Negus.